Well, over the last couple of days, we've been looking at the executive orders that President Trump has signed so far since returning to office. It is, well, some describe it as shock and awe, as so many of them are coming out. They were clearly ready for this moment. Now, blue state attorneys general have been going through them and planning lawsuits to counter whatever they can as they go through them. And, as we go through them, we're actually pretty pleased with some of the things we see, primarily because they're common sense. With me now to further analyze some of President Trump's executive orders is Mike Berry, Executive Director of the Center for Litigation at the American First Policy Institute. Prior to joining AFPI, Mike served on active duty as an attorney with the United States Marine Corps, was deployed to Afghanistan, also was with First Liberty, and a great friend of the Family Research Council. Mike, welcome back to Washington Watch. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's go through these EOs, starting with the one that rescinded executive orders and actions of the previous Biden administration. And quite frankly, there was a lot to rescind, 78, I believe. Give us some of the most notable there.
Where do we begin, Tony? Let's start with none other than the Biden executive order that converted the entire federal government into a voter registration machine. If I recall, that one was Executive Order 14019. I know because AFPI filed a lawsuit against President Biden and his administration to try to put a stop to that executive order. And so it's great to see President Trump on day one helping to finish the job. And then, you can go on down the list. There was the executive order under the Biden administration that permitted transgenders to serve in the military. Very detrimental to military readiness, detrimental to mission accomplishment, detrimental to national security. That one is undone now under Trump's administration. And, I've heard it others say it, and I'll echo that. I think we saw more action in the first 4 hours of President Trump's second term in office than we saw in 4 years under President Biden. And so this is the promises that were made on the campaign trail and promises that are being delivered now that he's in office.
So with one executive order, he can undo multiple executive orders from the previous administration. It does speak to the importance of legislation and statutory enactment of these policies. And I think that is a part of the focus of the incoming Trump administration. Obviously going to clean up a lot of the stuff left behind. But with the Republican House, Republican Senate, I think there'll be more of a focus on actually turning some of these initial executive orders that the Trump administration is doing into actual federal law.
I think that's right. And really, conservatives need to be keeping their eye on the calendar because really, in practical terms, we have about a 2-year window to get a lot of this done because, in 2 years from now, we're going to have midterm elections. People are going to be starting to look ahead towards the 2028 presidential election and begin thinking about that. So the window is not quite as broad as some people may think it is. And we've got to get to work now, which is why it's very encouraging to see just how ready the Trump administration has been, ready to go on day one. I've seen some commentators, when you compare it to what happened back in 2016 and when he took office in 2017, they were largely unprepared, possibly because they weren't necessarily expecting to have won, and so it caught everybody by surprise. Whether people inside the administration, but also people in Congress were maybe caught by surprise. This time around, I think we're in a much better position and much better footing to hit the ground running. We're seeing that, but I absolutely agree, Tony, that this is going to have to be a team effort, a tag team. Both the administration and the Congress, both chambers of Congress need to work with the administration to help put these policies into legislation, into law.
Mike Berry, I want to dive into some of these other executive orders that were issued. But first, just to kind of play off of what you said here to set the context so people better understand this. Only twice in history have we had a president who set out a term and then came back. And so you had an administration, the second administration, with full understanding of what it takes to execute many of these things. As you said, first time, not quite ready nor really understanding how the process worked. And then you add to that the fact that we had an administration for 4 years that was ideologically opposed. So I think that's what set the stage for this. You had black and white, and you also had an administration coming in that knew what to do, and they wasted no time in getting it done.
Absolutely. And the American people spoke loudly, clearly, and forcefully that it was a total repudiation of the Biden administration and their policies and their practices. And it wasn't just a delivery of the White House to President Trump, but it was also, it's no small feat to also have delivered the Senate and the House of Representatives, truly giving a mandate to the governing party now, the Republican Party, to go forth and put all of these promises into fruition and into action.
A couple of the issues that we've heard a lot about, felt it over the last 4 years, is censorship, free speech, the censorship of free speech, and the weaponization of the government. How has the president already addressed those with executive orders?
It was, I'm smiling and beaming because as I began to read the executive orders and not just look at the titles of them and to see what they were, but to get into the content of them, it's so exciting and refreshing as a constitutional First Amendment litigator myself to see things like declaring that there are only two genders. That's one of the things that President Trump did. Declaring that life begins at conception. Because in declaring that there are only two genders, he defined the term sex as determined at conception. So this is one of the first times in American history where we're now recognizing the right to life at conception as opposed to at birth. And that's not a minor or subtle distinction. That's a very significant distinction there and shift. And then you go on to telling every DEI office in the federal government, every federal agency that has a DEI office, which is probably every single one of them, you are to close your doors, shutter your windows, and stop whatever you're doing. Pens down, and we'll find something else for you to do, or you can enter the private workforce, whatever the case might be. It's creating DOGE, right? The Department of Governmental Efficiency is another great one. That's something that was promised, and it's been delivered. And so, we can go down the list, Tony, of probably naming off, our 3 or 5 favorite EOs, but those are 3 that really stood out to me immediately. And then let's not forget what he did with the Department of State, right? Is saying that the only flag that is going to fly on our embassies or in Department of State buildings is the American flag. No longer are we going to try to virtue signal to the world with pride flags or any other type of flags. It's going to be the stars and stripes, the American flag, and what a fantastic message that sends, not only to America, but to the rest of the world, that America is back.
Let me just say that's a big issue from the standpoint of even when Mike Pompeo was Secretary of State, he was battling that inside the government, as there were others close to the president wanting to fly the pride flag at embassies abroad. And so for the president, by executive order, to state that, that's into discussion. That's what's going to happen. We're only going to have the American flag flying. Mike, anything yet on, last time in 2016, in May of that first year, he issued the executive order on religious freedom. And that's something, obviously, that's been under attack under the Biden administration and something you care about if you've worked so diligently to defend and advance. Where do we stand on that issue?
I think there's more good news to come on that front. None of the executive orders that have been issued thus far are explicitly or narrowly focused on religious freedom. We had the one that targets censorship and weaponization of justice. That's obviously going to touch on religious freedom, but it's really focused more on free speech and censorship issues. So I anticipate that there will be some future executive actions, whether they're via executive order or other presidential type executive actions, that will continue to protect religious freedom, restore the religious freedoms that we began to enjoy under the first Trump administration. One example that I think myself, you, and probably others others in the veteran and service member community are paying close attention to is an executive order that restores and reinstates the service members, the tens of thousands of service members who are punished and targeted and unlawfully kicked out or otherwise adversely treated in the military for having a religious objection to Biden's COVID vaccine mandate. So I think that's one that a lot of people, myself included, are watching closely to see. We want to see what it does, what it says. And that's another one, Tony, where I think there's a lot of work that Congress can do to come side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the administration and ensure that some of those gains that are done through executive action are cemented through legislative action.
Speaking of that one in particular, because I know it's personal to you, and I've talked to many, many members who are still in the military who have been passed over for promotion because of this, because they didn't get the vaccine for religious conviction reasons. Will this set that right? Will those files that have, the fitness reports that have those marks in it, how is that corrected?
Well, the devil is going to be in the details on that one, because that's one that I said even years ago when we first started that fight and began representing the Navy SEALs, that's very difficult. It's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube, as we like to say, because it's difficult to pinpoint that somebody was passed over promotion precisely because or solely because of their objection to the vaccine mandate. As you and I know, and anybody who, in our audience who served in the military knows, the military and the bureaucracy is very, very good at papering over and sort of whitewashing and sanitizing what we all know to be blatant discrimination. But what they'll do is to say, oh, well, your performance evaluation, you didn't score quite as high as these other people did. And that's the reason why you got passed over, not because of your refusal to get the vaccine. And we all know that that's just what in the legal, we call that pretext, right? It's a pretext that's being used for what is actually the real reason is they don't want people who have sincerely held strong religious convictions and belief serving in the military, because they're worried that when they are given an order to do something that they know is wrong, it's always people of faith are the ones that stand up and say, that's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. We can't do that. I refuse to carry out that order, or I refuse to follow that order because it violates the Constitution and it violates the First Amendment. They want to kick those people out. But to answer your question, I think it can be done, but it's going to require a lot of heavy lifting. It's going to require a Secretary of Defense who has a backbone, who's willing to go to the mat for these service members and to say, we're going to get this done. We will that we will get rid of any bureaucrat who resists, obstructs, and tries to prevent us from restoring these service members and these veterans. And I hope that we have that.
Well, Mike, for all the reasons that you laid out there, it's so important that people of faith can serve in our nation's military, because that's the ones we want. That's the ones we want with the lethal power of the military in their hands, because they have a moral anchor, and that's so important. And those are the very ones that were driven out during the Biden administration. Just have about 45 seconds left, Mike. But for those that were forced out because of this, is there any way to make it right for them?
I think so. I think you give them the opportunity to return if they want to. I will say I've been disheartened to hear so many of my former colleagues in uniform to say, I don't want to go back. I'm done. I'm going to move on with life and do something else. I don't trust the military anymore. That's a national security travesty to hear qualified, excellent service members to say, I don't want to put on the uniform anymore because I'm ashamed of what it's become. I believe that our military still has good people. It still stands for good things. It was hijacked for 4 years, and we're ready to take it back. And I think if that happens, I think we will see us turn the corner, and the good people will begin to start to come back.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, a part of that, and not through executive order, but through the administration, through Congress, is we're going to have to weed out those politically correct flag officers that enabled all of these attacks on religious freedom. Mike Berry, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to see you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.